Welcome back to the Sideshed podcast. Before we get started, last month we ran this crazy promotion over at Tradie Web Guys where we were giving away $5,500 websites to anybody that came on board as a marketing client of ours. As you can imagine, we got smashed with inquiries and many people took that up, dozens in fact. However, one thing that I didn't consider at that point was a lot of businesses came back and said, listen, our annual budget is expired because in Australia, our end of financial year is the end of June. Is there any chance we can do this, extend this into the next month? At which point I said, well, no, but now I'm thinking, in fairness, we probably should have considered that. So we are going to run this out for an extra month. So if any of you guys out there do want to claim a free $5,500 website and you have the opportunity to do so, head across to tradie.wiki/free. If you're watching this, there's the link right there. If you're listening again, tradie.wiki/free, fill the form in, and we'll go from there. Enjoy the show. Folks, before we get started on this podcast, I want to let you know about something extremely exciting and, in truth, something that can help you streamline what we're going to be talking about in this podcast by years, literally years. The guest that I've got on the show today, Mr. Al Levy, he's been on the show a number of times. He is a wealth of information, and he is the system and operating manual guru when it comes to trade businesses. If you are interested in fast tracking what we're going to be discussing today, which is about hiring and recruitment, or any other areas of your trade business, I thoroughly encourage you to head to the following link, because as Sideshed enthusiasts, you guys get a special offer where you save a ton of money on it and you get the red carpet treatment. So the link is as follows. It's tradie.wiki/7, as in the number 7, power, POWER. Again, tradie.wiki/7 power. If you're watching this, that's the URL. If you're listening to this, go and write it down. Head across to the show notes if you want for this episode, and you can see that link. Again, tradie.wiki/7, as in the number 7, power. Go and check that out, guys. It is an amazing program, the best I've seen when it comes to systemizing your business. I cannot encourage it enough. I'm Matt from the Sideshed. Enjoy the show. If you're short on staff and you're currently screaming for new team members, this is a podcast you cannot afford to miss. Some of the things that we include within this podcast are the following. Firstly, some of the steps that you need to take before you even consider hiring. Secondly, the reason why no one wants to work for you and your competitors seem to get all of the awesome staff. And lastly, how you can develop a crisis-proof recruitment process that never dies. Uncle Al, welcome back to the Sideshed podcast.
Thank you so much. Glad to be back in the house.
Absolutely.
Matt built.
Yeah, the most requested and most accoladed Sideshed guest, I would say, without a doubt.
I have earned it.
You have. You've earned the credibility. People scream for Uncle Al. So, mate,
yes.
welcome. So welcome back, of course. For you guys that are new to the show, if you're watching or listening to this, this is Mr. Al Levy, who is the 7 power contractor over at the number 7, powercontractor.com. Al has been a frequent guest on the show over the years, and he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to anything to do with trade businesses. And of course, Al preaches primarily operating manual side of things, which some of you may be familiar with as systems, SOPs, wikis, that kind of thing. So Al is the system guy, and I will link to every single one of his previous podcasts within this, the show notes for this episode. So head across to the sideshed.com and you can find Al's repertoire of podcasts. And of course, Al actually has his own podcast. Make sure you go and subscribe to that. That's 7 Power Contractor across all platforms. Al, how are you, mate?
I am doing great. So great to see you virtually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know it's been a while.
Well, actually, we're planning a trip over to your neck of the woods in January. So we're definitely going to be in Houston.
Okay.
So yeah,
Well,
no,
it's,
we
it's
picked the
only
right,
this far on a map between Houston and Scottsdale,
right.
Phoenix.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll see. We've got a bit. We don't really
Yeah,
have any agenda over there, so maybe we can organise a bit of a tee up.
that'd
But
be great.
we've got of course January in North America, middle of winter, perhaps not so much down your way, but we're going to a wedding in Mexico, which is of course where every Canadian wants to migrate to because it's they can thaw out for a few weeks, and so that's what we're doing. And, yeah, so
that's also what keeps us going here in Phoenix. We love all the
tourism.
Canadians coming down, bringing your money.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Beer up.
Oh yeah,
drink all our beer up as long as you leave the money.
Yeah, well, we'll be doing.
We'll make more.
We'll be doing our best to help out. So,
thank you, Australians, as well. Thank you for doing your part. We appreciate it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, mate, we're here to talk today about the ongoing issue around finding and retaining staff. And we have touched on this in the past. And for you guys that are interested in this, I encourage you, and again, I'll link to these in the show notes, but head back to episode 58, where we talked about staffing power, which was part of a series I did with Al. We also did a great episode on org chart, or organizational structure, which was episode 61. Again, go check that out. And then we did a complete series essentially on how to find, retain, and train team members, which was episode 137, 38, and 39. I will link to those in the show notes again, guys, so you can go back and check those out. But obviously this landscape has evolved a little bit out since we spoke last, with things like global pandemics, borders.
That was a very badly timed laugh, but I don't know. The pain is really making me laugh. Yeah.
Small things that have come along in the way. Global pandemics,
just tiny little things that have popped up.
Wars in countries, but the crux of what we're going to talk about from a foundational point of view is that whole the process, which, as we talked about offline, is an evolving process. So we're here to talk a little bit today about some of those evolutions and I suppose how you guys out there can navigate some of these issues around staff and team, because every single person that I speak to anywhere in the world is having the same issue. And there are some things that are potentially going to come into play, soon, which may mitigate some of these obstacles to a degree. For example, borders are going to be opened up, which means people are going to be able to travel, and there's going to be, new talent coming into the country and that kind of thing. But again, it is, in truth, it's probably the issue that I've never seen go away over the years.
And, obviously, Matt, a little bit younger than I am, but I was telling Matt before we got on the podcast is, obviously here, this whole thing became explosive because when you mix in COVID and, shortages, and then this housing bubble here in the United States and Canada, basically around the world, all of a sudden blew up, and everything, including toilet paper, all of a sudden became scarce. And I don't even want to talk about the other items that went scarce, but the reality is, in my lifetime, going back to my, I was the third generation, now a fourth generation plumbing, heating, air conditioning, electrical company in New York. And my nephew is there, the fourth generation, with my middle brother. And the reality is over the years that I was there, we had shortages in labor and we've had shortages in material. This one, we got the home run. Shortage of material, shortage of labor combined together with a crazy market. So it's been pretty wild. Here's what I'm going to share with you early on. The people that invested themselves in what I used to call staffing power when I was doing one-to-one work, they invested in themselves time, energy, and money with the systems that made this possible. Mm-hmm. And they did not have a problem finding all the great techs they ever needed. Would you like me to repeat that again? They had no problem finding all the great techs because they didn't sit around waiting for that, what we call it today, a unicorn. What I used to call lightning in a bottle is people lining up at your door that are willing techs with great skills who are going to do it your way. And you're just going to keep on trying to catch lightning in a bottle or find unicorns. And here's what I can say to you. Good luck, because it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And if it happened, it would have happened for me because I was really good at stealing your techs. My brother Richie and I used to go to seminars sometimes where other techs were going to be at the company. And we used to go pirate them. You know what I mean? Steal them. And we would overpay them to come to our company. And then they would show up in Richie and I would be the last two techs of 25 standing in the office at 2 a.m. in the morning. And we'd look at each other and go, Matt was the best tech. He's not even mediocre here. And now we just blew up our pay scale, bringing Matt in here, and everybody is upset. Does that sound familiar to anybody you've spoken to, Matt?
Yeah, well, that's a thing. Like, I know I was speaking with a colleague only last week, actually, and he was saying there are, again, not necessarily in the trade space, but there are, companies that are offering, like, these huge companies, Oracle and, Apple and things like these, and just poaching people's team members, and they can, because they can say, well, we'll give you this much more as a base salary, and we'll guarantee you get a 10 grand pay rise each year, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and you can work from home, and you can, and they're all like, we just can't compete with that sort of stuff.
And by the way, it's creeped into the trades, and not in a good way, by the way. Not that it's a good, look, if you're a tech, by all means, make as much money as you can, maximize the time you have as a tech, because it's finite. Your best years are only so much. If you're still working as a tech every day in the field and you're 50, 60, 70, and that is not an exception in places, that's a problem.
Right.
So what I would get to is, and you mentioned about the org chart, is what changed this for us was my brother Richie and I were sitting in an audience, a seminar, and the guy on the stage, and this, by the way, was when, look at my face, so you'll know this is a while ago. We were in our late 20s, early 30s. And the guy on the stage says the average age of the tech, what's that?
Before COVID then?
Just an hour before COVID. So we're sitting in the audience, and the guy goes, the average age of the tech is moving to 50. And if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you hear the average age of the tech is going to 50, we were freaked out. So we rush home, we build this beautiful training center. I train the guys up on what we do. Sure enough, a year later, they're in the field, and my brother Richie calls me up and goes, didn't you show him motor rotation? And I go, I did. Then he'd call up another time and go, didn't you show him this? And didn't you show him this? And finally, I just said to him, I did, but they've been out of this training and there's nothing to hang on to. So Matt, here's the funny, not so funny, is that, well, everything's funnier now. We went back and we built the manuals. That's where the operating manuals came from. So we wrote all the operating manuals, invested all the money in that, rolled it all out. And when we got done and we looked at our trade manuals for the trades we did, and we looked at the training center, we realized we had built it all wrong, all wrong. The reason is because in the trade manuals, it tells you the tasks that you must demonstrate and learn here. And then next level, be able to sell that task to me right here. Be neat and clean right here, and do a technically expert repair right here. So it's in-house training, not at your house training, which, by the way, goes in every website, every marketing thing I've ever done with any of the clients that I work with when I was doing this one-to-one. I don't anymore. The good news is it's now online. And so that's the same thing with built on the back of the manuals. And the manuals, I realized, with my clients, what they really wanted was great staff. Let's face it, this isn't new, but they realized they had to eat their vegetables, which is the org charts and the manuals. And then you leverage that in the next phase, which is what I call signature staffing systems, S3 for short, is really where you start to pay this off even more.
Sure.
Because it's finding the holes in your existing techs and staff, all your stuff, by the way. And the reason they have holes is because they oversold themselves in the interview with you. You didn't ask them, because I know I didn't. We didn't ask them any questions. We didn't do any written tests. We didn't do any hands-on stuff. We basically were just hoping that you would say yes. And so then you would show up, and later on we'd find out what you didn't know.
Yeah.
And then the second one is the new hires that you have, they have holes, and the goal is to find them much faster and figure out where they fit in your organization based on the chart and what they should be getting paid. So those are the two things that you start with. But the great freedom is when you're able to take young, willing apprentices with no skills and build them into the techs that are willing with great skills. And that is dependent on systems, manuals, training center, and the bridge, which is training curriculum, and you becoming better trainers.
Yeah, and you know what? This is something that, like, we had this conversation with, like, I'm in a big sort of coaching group with on the agency side of things, so nothing to do with trades. But one of the big things that one of the guys was saying is we just can't. There's no talent out there at the moment. And I said, well, why don't you just train people? He said, well, I could do that, but it would take 6 to 12 months to do that. And I'm like, you've been complaining about this for the last 2 years since I've known you. Like, why not start that? And I think it was like a bit of a penny drop moment for him. And as soon as I said it, I was like, I should be doing a better job of this myself. Like, and you know what I just found interesting about what you said, Al, that when you bring someone into your organization, you might bring them in to be doing a certain role, but you don't necessarily know where they're going to end up. And I've noticed that a lot within my own business. Like, now we've been growing really quickly, and I've got team members that have come in there and I've hired them for certain positions that they're not, but I'm sort of just figuring out that they're sort of better suited in other positions, because they'll tell you things. They'll come into your business because they've applied for a job because they want a job in doing whatever it might be. But it doesn't take long to sort of figure out where their strengths are and where they're, better, and I don't know if this is a failure on hiring or if this is just par for the course. Like, I don't know. I guess the point is, like, when you're going through the recruitment stage, and we have like a very, very comprehensive recruitment process, and, we typically hire really, really well these days, but I still find, like, without time in the trenches and without actually seeing and observing how people operate, it's very hard to figure out where they're going to belong.
Yeah, I think, for me, when we finally bought into this, where we build our own from scratch, and we tied it back to the org chart, they would rise up the org chart, because what we were desiring and what we accomplished was that we wanted to be the employer of choice. And the way that we differentiated ourselves from all of our competition is, we don't promise a job, we promise a career. We made it a real thing. And so every position where we would do this, manuals and training absolutely help you to cross-train so that they can fit and fill other boxes. But ultimately, you are the one that controls the boxes of your organization. They will be tweaked as you're growing pretty quick, and there will be new boxes. Do be careful. You do have to define what goes on 80% of the time in each of the boxes.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise your staff will do it, and they'll tell you what they will and won't do. And that's not it. Now, they get to have some input, and that is really on the procedures and things that go to filling that box. But I think, one of the turning points is we got better at always recruiting, and we were not good at it because we were not proactive. We were reactive. We waited for somebody to quit.
Yeah.
And then we'd look around. Actually, I tell the story all the time. We were New York City union shop. So I don't know what the equivalent of union is there, but, basically very difficult to hire and fire and things of that nature. So they would give us 2 weeks notice, which is
we just call that employees here. It's very, very hard to fire people over there.
Very hard to fire. Okay. Yes. You guys,
I know what you mean.
Yeah. So we get 2 weeks notice, which was good. And sometimes we get a week's notice, and sometimes the keys would be laying on the dashboard. And my brothers and I would look at each other. I said, is Matt still here? You wouldn't know. And so, then we would be desperate. So now we'd have to go out and recruit, hire. And when you're desperate, you hire anybody who walks in the door, because that truck is sitting in the yard. You're not making any money.
What did you call it? The mirror test?
The mirror test. Very good. So what the mirror test was, my brother Marty, who never lifted a tool in his life, he used to nickname our hiring practices, fog in the mirror, you're hired. So always recruiting. Here's the funny part. Funny, not funny, but we were really great marketers, but we never spent a moment of energy of taking our great skills at marketing and applying it to recruiting, which is what it is. Yep. Except you're taking marketing and looking for willing people that you can develop. Now, if you don't have the skills and the training and all these things that you have to learn, then you have to hope that they are fully trained. But that's a problem, because that pool is very, very small. And if you don't know it now, I don't know when you'll know it. But here's the thing that Matt is talking about is, as you explained when you were coaching with somebody else, is I was driving along with Ellen one day, Ellen Rohr, who's also should be pretty famous here. So we were co-consultants, and I was driving and she was sitting on the side, which was usually we'd have these stupid conversations on the way to an airport or to a client. And she looked at me and she goes, when's the best time to plant an oak tree? And I go, I I grew up in New York City. I don't even know what an oak tree is. Why don't you just tell me? And she goes, 10 years ago and today, because down the road, you'll be back in the same situation if you don't do what I'm talking about right now, which is get always recruiting, always hiring, always orienting, always training, always retaining. That is the first phase of the Staffing Power program. And it's the same in this program as well. And then that allows you, as you get better at those 5 skills, is to do what I call apprentice to junior tech. So if you have all your big trade manuals, I'm not going to trust Matt when he comes out of class 4 months. Maybe he's been with me 60 to 90 days, proven that he's, can show up every time, clean and sober, or as close to sober as you guys will accept. And basically get him that he could be in a truck and go make us money and handle some calls and make himself some money and prove some time on his clock. And then I'll bring him back and take him from junior tech to senior tech, next stop along the way, where I teach him all the rest of the trade. There's a lot more to that. The next phase, the last one, is senior tech to field supervisor. So by the time you have 8 to 12 service trucks running, if you think they're all going to go through the service manager and he can give them all the sales, operation, technical support they need, you are sadly mistaken, because they will become the choke point. Or if you have an install crew where you're running 3 or 5 crews a day, that install manager is going to become the choke point. So you need field supervisors. But the problem is, Matt, people go, hey, Matt's a good tech. Why don't we just make him a field supervisor? Based on what? What do you know? What do you know? You're a good tech. That doesn't make you a good manager. I wasn't a good manager. I had to go to school and learn a lot of this stuff and go to a lot of classes. But that's really a problem when you appoint somebody, because everyone who didn't get appointed goes, of course, Matt's buddies with the owners. Brown nose, an expression we use here. And so, of course, he gets the job, and all of us are bitter about it. Or worse is you don't think any of these guys are good enough. You go outside the company, bring somebody in who you don't even know anything about, and you appoint them to be the field supervisor, which is crippling to culture if you're trying to build good culture from the bottom up, not top down. Here's to it.
Looping back to what you were saying before about, I find it interesting when people, like, everyone's got this problem around staff, which they want to address. But the reality is there's steps that they need to take before that for that to become relevant. You know, how you were saying, okay, well, you need to have your org chart dialed in, and you need to have your, you need to have a clear understanding of who's coming into what position, roles, responsibilities outlined. Like, people need to know what they're coming into the job to do, but like, people sort of, I feel sometimes they want to skip those steps and just go straight to the hiring part, which is why they can't hire and why they won't retain.
And why they're very disappointed in the results constantly, just like I was years ago, very disappointed. Why don't they read my mind as to what I want?
I mean, you taught me this years ago, but like, the power of the org chart, like, we pretty much run our entire recruitment process begins. And in truth, our entire like strategy for the business starts at the org chart. Like, and by that I mean, and again, this is really what I learned from you all those years back. But like, when we do our planning, which involves 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, annual, quarterly, and then all the way down into sort of monthly trajectories. And we've evolved this process a little bit with implementing some other systems and things like that. But at the crux of it, like, we need to know, okay, well, in a year's time, if we're trying to achieve X, we're going to need these people in this position in order to do that. And then we can reverse engineer it from there. And it's never worked for me any other way. Like, and I tried it, don't get me wrong, for a long time, but it never worked any other way. Like, we needed to have a really clear understanding of where the business needs to go. And that needs to be, the team needs to see that. They need to this is one thing that I've learned over the years, and especially over the last year, is that team members need to understand where their role fits into the bigger picture. Because otherwise, you get these situations, and I've had it recently, where people are like, oh, I want a pay rise. And I'm like, okay, why is that? And they go, well, because I've done A, B, C, and D. And I'm like, well, that's your job. So why do you want a pay rise? And they're like, well, because I've just been doing it really well. And I'm like, well, that's your job. Like, that's why I hired you. And they're like, oh, okay, but then over here is they haven't been doing this, this, and this. And I'm like, aha. So now let's look at the bigger picture here. So you're saying that you want a pay rise for doing your job, whereas your department is completely down on numbers. And I'm like, how's that going to work? They're like, well, that's not my fault. And I'm like, no, but it's definitely your problem.
Yeah, so, we get to share the best of us get to share the problem. The problem is, as an owner, and I know in my own company, is that I always felt like I had to come up with the answers. I had to fix everything. And honestly, it wasn't until we did the manuals where we did meetings and involved them and let them speak and get some fingerprints on it, is that I came to realize that I don't have to have all the great solutions. They do the work. There is some fingerprints that they should put into this, that they do, but we still lead as to what we need in these boxes. And if you don't define them in objective language, and I'm talking way more than a job description, that's a problem. But now if you don't have the manuals and the org chart, you can't do what you really want. Let's face it.
Sure.
You want, and the reason if you're tuning into this is, when I said finally have all the great text you ever wanted, I'm thinking you were interested at the very least, because you just went through this difficulty, and it's difficult for you, but I've been through this before, and it just comes in waves, and this will pass. And then you'll think, well, I don't have to do anything. And you're going to get blindsided again.
Oh yeah.
I guarantee it.
Yeah.
If you don't change your habits, which is moving on to the staffing systems, which is taking manuals and then learning how to build the right training center, right training room, training curriculum, and becoming a better trainer is how you begin to solve this problem for good. I was mentioning on your page, the page that you have for the staffing system, which basically there's 6 video testimonials from clients I called up. And the reason there are only 6 is because I only asked the first 6 people. I could just go down the list. They're super happy. They're companies that have grown really big, or companies that got really big and got to the point where they could sell. Because here in the United States, there's a thing called private equity, and there's a tons of money chasing contracting businesses. And because they were systematic, they were super attractive to people with loads of money. So there's really great reasons to do this.
Isn't that interesting?
It doesn't matter if you're best friend.
I mean, that again, that's a kind of a different topic, but like, I think like at the crux of it, it all stems back to having a business that has great processes in place. I mean, there's that whole perception out there in the marketplace where people think like trade businesses are not sought as valuable acquisitions, like they're. And I've worked in companies, and the guy that I've used to work for, and he's prolifically acquiring businesses. He pretty much owns every plumbing company in Sydney, I think, at the moment. Like, it's unbelievable. But there are people out there that will buy your company. And private equity, I mean, again, I remember doing a podcast on this going back quite a while, but was talking about how some businesses, like private equity organizations out there, they will go out, they will pay more.
A lot of times they pay it because it's not their money, one.
Right.
So if you're buying a business, the stock money, there's a lot of money being pumped and the rest of it. But here in the United States, I will share one thing that happened, Matt, is private equity liked to buy like restaurants, chain restaurants, things of that nature, because they were easy to repeat and didn't really need a whole lot. Well, a little thing called COVID shut them all down.
Right.
And the only thing that was making any money was, guess what? Home service businesses. Yeah. And so we were already attractive, but we went off the charts. I mean, off the charts. But people think, well, my business must be worth that. No, it isn't. Because if you're the only one, the glue that keeps it together, because you know everything, they don't want to buy your job. They want to buy a repeatable, systematic business. And if you don't have things like manuals, and if you don't have a staffing program, and you don't have these other things that we've always talked about in the 7 powers, that's going to be a problem. And you and I have also spoken about it. Is, when you get confused about, what should I be working on, or, what's the most important thing? And yes, I said there's 7, planning, operations, staffing, sales coaching, marketing, finance. But this dirty little secret is there's 2 things that you should be working on. Making more texts, which means texts are great at communications, which leads to great sales. Neat and clean, truck neat and clean, the job's neat and clean. All that they do is right and operationally correct. And the other thing is technical. You came to my house because it was a leaky sink. The sink should not be leaking tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so that's a technically expert repair. That's what you do. If you're doing install, it's communications, operation, tech. The other thing is making more calls, which is more calls than you can humanly do in a day. And it sounds scary. Is why would I want more calls than I can humanly do in a day? Well, I didn't just say calls. What I really meant is the right amount of calls from the right customer at the right time. Mm-hmm. And so think of a bathtub that's flowing over. Because if you have way more calls than you can humanly do in a day, you get to decide who you go to, how much you charge, and what kind of work you do. Mm-hmm. And it will force you to kick in gear the more techs that I talked about.
It's actually interesting you say that, because we work with like hundreds of trade businesses, from all over the place. Run a lot of marketing things, initiatives for them. And like part of for some of these businesses, especially the project-based businesses, like take builders and like guys that do like longer projects, like they don't have a lead problem. Like some of them, especially at the moment, like they're booked out 2 years in advance. Like they're more work is their nightmare. But the problem they have, stemming on from what you just said then, is that the conversations aren't slowing down, and they're wasting a lot of time speaking to people that are not yet qualified or not qualified at all, as their avatar.
It's ending.
Yeah.
It's ending. I'll help you. It's ending. Even though you have a backlog of 2 years, watch how much of it disappears. Because as soon as interest rates begin to rise around the world and people have settled in, and they're not going to, here in America, they were just paying whatever you asked for. You never bought a house when you sold it at that price. It was way above that price.
Oh man,
there were bidding wars to buy homes.
It's shocking.
And I don't know if it's the same with you, but whoever people in this program, because it is online now, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, the UK, and now South Africa have bought into these programs. And that's pretty cool. But when we talk, it's the same. It's the same problems.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, it's only here. Now they can be at different levels, because I remember you guys were much later to the COVID circus than we were, but it finally came around. So yeah.
I mean, and that's exactly right. And all those things, like you say, the conversations I have with, I have with people from all over the planet, they're very similar problems. Anyway, interestingly, these, I suppose the common resolve here, or the common, I suppose, workaround is like essentially tying back to what we're saying in the space of, first of all, owning the fact that things need to change. And I think like going straight to the problem is very rarely the answer, because there's things that need to happen as a leader. And, I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I see it like all the time. People, I just can't find the right staff. And I think I would never want to work for you. Your business is it's a shitstorm. Like, and that's an ownership issue. It's a leadership issue, and it's something that as leaders in the business, you have to, you got to eventually face. If you want things to improve, and then from there, like once you've addressed that issue, and again, this is like showering, right? Like you don't just do it once and say it's over. Like you've got to keep working on these things, especially if you're high D.
We hope you don't do it once.
Yeah, exactly. Like especially if you're a high D personality like me, like this is like my wife will tell you, this is an ongoing development process, which I can never get to fast enough, apparently. But the point I'm trying to make is you've got to be aware of these things, and you've got to own it, and you've got to be willing to change. You've got to want to change, and then you've got to go and find the resources that can help you change. And only then, is anything else going to get better? Because like the fish rots from the head down in every case, So like you got to own these issues. I know what these problems are, figure them out. Like, and in 95% of the cases, it's going to be you and your leadership team. And and when I'm going through this in my own company at the moment, I can see now, like, as I said, we've hired people in positions, but I can see things need to change. And like structure needs to shift. And so, I've owned it. I know there's an issue there. I'm going to fix it. But like, the point is, like, it's going to be very hard for me to bring team members into like a fractured organizational chart at the moment. Like I need to get clarity around that. I need to get clarity around roles, responsibilities. Like we run the scorecard system. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Al, but like it brings complete transparency into roles, into people's positions, provided they stick to them. So,
Yeah.
okay, here, like straight away, there's training that needs to happen here, more training. Like, anyway, it's like an ongoing ecosystem that needs to evolve.
You are speaking to what goes on in the trades. This is a parallel railroad track. We are not talking about things that are different. And I got my dose of medicine. You know, my company had been around a long time by the time I showed up. And I was lucky enough to be in a giant organization here in the United States called Nexstar. And that's where I met Ellen all those years ago.
Sure.
And, and I was bouncing around and we were on a bus with the leader. And I said to him, I said, you know, what makes the difference between the successful shops and the ones that don't make it? And he immediately looks at me and he goes, the owner.
Yeah.
And I go, wait a second, you know, it's my employees don't cooperate. I'm a union shop. And I start just going, and he just says, time out. It's you. It's you. It's you, the owner. It's always your fault. He says, here's what I'm going to tell you. An owner has to inspire and implement. I have people that are in small populations, 50,000, maybe less, making tons of money. And then I have guys in a market of 2 million losing their shirt every day. He said it's the owner's ability to inspire and implement, not one or the other. And that was very hard medicine, because it's much easier to point at you, Matt, than it is to point at me, Al. But I do an exercise in leadership training where you put your arms out and I say, here's the thing. You can reach your arms as far as you can. You only control that what's in here. Everything that's going on out here, you have no control. Here's the great news. The most important things are in here when you reach your arms forward. That's where the change came from me. That's where the changes come for every one of my clients. And that's, of course, what they're experiencing today if they follow along and get these structures in place. First, you know, for the operating program, but really to get to what you want is to end this problem. I mean, forever, if you can start with this idea of taking young, willing people with no skills and be able to make them into willing tech with great skills and offering a career, not a job. And that's easy to mouth off, but there's systems that it takes to make this happen. And you have to transform. And I was not willing to transform. And anybody who's read my book or listened to my book, and they will know that I called myself out. I was attached to being a rescuer. I was attached to being a guru, and I was attached to be a fireman. And if you are any of what I just said, you will unconsciously keep your company small and tied to you. And you, my friends, will always be the choke point.
Yeah.
And not reaching what you want, what you say you want.
And you know what, Al, I see that as well replicated into levels of management. Like as your organization grows, like, you know, we've got like one of our managers especially who wants to hang on to things because he thinks it's a way that he can protect his position. And I had a meeting.
I'll come back to that one. Go ahead.
And I had a meeting with him yesterday, and I said, this is where the business is heading. This is the role that I would have promoted you into, but guess what? Because you refuse to create processes on where you're at currently right now, I'm promoting this person into that position because I've told you for years to do this and you refuse to do it because you think you're hanging on to your job, and this has just cost you a promotion.
Wow, that's scary.
That was like a sledgehammer. And I've had this conversation with him, I reckon, 5 times in the last 2 years. I said, you need to do this, and it refuses to do it. And then he'll go and talk about why he's not doing it to my ops manager or whatever. And so I know definitively
whoever he wants to cry over beer or coffee with. I hear you.
Right. And I'm like, okay, well, you dig your own freaking grave here. So we'll see if things change.
Well, again, the box and the manual and the key metrics and the KPIs, known performance indicators, are really big. But when I was putting the manuals together and, you know, spent $150,000 in today's money, I was writing the outline, took me a year to do, but basically I was going to each of the boxes, and my operations manager, I started to ask him questions. And every question came down to, well, it depends, not always the same. And finally, I just put my pen down. I looked at him and I go, this is what I'm thinking. You don't want to give me the information because you think that's your job security. And we nicknamed that JS every time we run into it, JS, job security. And I said, here's the deal. If you're going to hang on to all this knowledge and keep me a hostage at my own company, what happens when the bus hits you, which is bad for you, but it's bad for me? And here's how I feel. I'm in the same spot. Go ahead. But here's what you don't know. You don't get paid for what you know. You get paid for what you empower others at this company to do. That's your real skill set. That's where you go. So anyway, he finally coughs up all the information. We get all the manuals. We get all the training. His life actually got better because they weren't calling him up nights and weekends and everything. I'm sorry, what'd you say, Matt?
Did you fire him?
No, I did not fire him. He's still there to this day. How's that for a good story?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm a very nice guy. I'm not like Matt at all.
I know you keep telling me. Yeah, I know.
Is there anybody behind me?
Yeah,
is there anybody behind me that could say no?
Yeah,
no,
Matt's
there's nobody behind me.
Matt.
Yeah, no, but it's a misconception that they hang on to. And part of this is, if they've been able to run in the yard like a dog free, and all of a sudden you say, well, there's a place where you have to be, they don't like it. Now they can help define the job. They can define what goes on in the box. I am not changing the box to fit you, Matt. Mm-hmm. I'm helping you fill this box because when you do, there's more things ahead for you. In my company, we had spokes. So we had one main hub and multiple spokes. You could go off and run a branch. You could stay here and be a field supervisor and make money, not just on what you did, but what your team does, which changes that situation, especially by the time when you're a 40 or 50-year-old tech, you can tell the runway's running out.
Mm-hmm. And this is I don't know. And again, I'm taking this as like, although I've tried and tried and tried, to try to communicate this, it's obviously a failure from my point in communicating this clearly to this guy over the years, because like for whatever reason, it's falling on deaf ears, and I don't know if this is now become, and it's kind of, I don't know if it's a drastic approach to it, but I get to the point where you're like, okay, well, enough's enough. Like things have to change. And
it has to, you can't keep going in this conversation because everybody else is taking note. And by the way, I'm not speaking to me and just Matt. I'm speaking to all of you. When I would finally fire someone that was doing this kind of behavior or worse, everyone else would come up to me and go, why did you keep him on so long? It made all the rest of us have to suffer with it.
Right.
And I realized that I was not being right. So that's why the steps of corrective action, Matt, that we've talked about before, there's 4 corrective steps of action. He has earned his 4 steps of corrective action. He's either helping to stay here or he's helping out. And the analogy I always use was trained by my good friend, taught into me, is he explained to me that staffing is like a moving train. There are people that will jump on. There are people that will jump off. There's some people that you will kick off. And some of them will ride with you all the way to the end, wherever the end is, but you'll never know. The goal is to make them good while they're on the team with you and on that train. And that's what he needs to understand right now. And if you're listening, wherever you are, your truck, your home, or your business, you have to start making these tough decisions about, and Ellen has a great analogy. If you're questioning this, are they making the light bulb brighter or dimmer as you run down what they will and won't do and how they are and aren't performing on as many objective measures? Because frankly, I'm not interested in your opinion. I'm interested in what is objective. And of course, it helps when you've got SOPs and manuals and training and they brought up, and they can do it. And now they're choosing not to do it. That makes it a whole lot easier. Because honestly, I used to hate to fire. It was my dad who made me change my ways. He came to me when I was relatively young in the business and he said to me, you can't hire one more new person, because I love that. He goes, until you learn how to fire. And I hated it so much that was one of my reasons for making it more objective, less opinion-based, objective, and then doing it in steps. Whereas my brothers would like Matt, don't do that again. Matt, don't do that again. Matt, don't do that again. Yeah. It's like yelling at your kids. Try saying no to your kids. And ultimately, one day you guys just go, well, F you. We had enough of you. You're out of here. And then you look, there's nothing in the file. Good luck with the labor boards.
Yeah, sure.
You're out of luck. And so there is one thing I would say to, if you're on the fence for somebody, Ellen taught me this is a really good trick. If you're on the fence with somebody and you know they've been trained up, basically you say, look, Matt, here's how I see it. This is not working out for both of us. And so if you're willing to invest yourself in helping to fill this box and do the rest of it and perform, you and I will spend the next 2 weeks together working through this. And at the end of 2 weeks, we can have an honest conversation about, are you back on board or are you headed out? And then we'll just part as friends. And you'd be surprised how many times before you make that final call, at the very least, they're not surprised, which is the worst. That in America, that usually means a gunshot.
So what are those, just touching on those four steps of corrective actions you mentioned?
One is a meeting, and you have them state at the end what in their own words, what you talked about. And they just sign up, a basic note, and you put it in the file and go, look, if we're not back here talking about this in 6 months from now, I'll just go in there and rip it up. And of course you can do this digitally today. Mm-hmm. The second one is a formal write-up where they actually get, an email or note to the effect that this is the behavior that happened. Here's when it happened. If you continue on, the next step is this. The step 3 is suspension, which is go home, spend 2 days, Matt, figure out if you want to be on board, if you really want the career that I promised you when you first showed up. And the last one is you're out. Now, the 4 steps of corrective action, and I used to call it 4 steps of discipline, but I realized that was a bad name. 4 steps of corrective action really was my hope. When I was sitting in my office, when my door opens, Matt, this is forgotten. You have an opportunity to go out there and reset things in a better way. But if we're back here discussing step 2, step 3, step 4, the ones you do not get 4 steps for is if you lie, cheat, or steal, you're out. There are no 4 steps for that.
It's interesting. Is that like would you have that as a documented process that the whole company?
Yes, it's very documented.
Part of the onboarding. These are the 4 steps of corrective action.
You can allude to it but again, it's like everything, how you bring it out, right? So since you're a marketing guy, you'll understand that is you got to have a good rune or headline before you get rolling through. Is Matt, we pride ourselves on being a very objective, fair company to everyone that's here. Mm-hmm. So what does fair mean? It's not based on my opinion. These are the things that it'll take to fill this first box that you're coming into. And then we have a lot more boxes for you as you go. But you're not getting any of those until you prove to me that you can occupy the box in the way that we need. We will meet up periodically, see how you're doing, so you don't have to guess where you are. But if you're not performing on what I have trained you on, and you showed me you could do in the training, and now you're not doing it, we do have a thing called 4 steps of corrective action, and we will engage that. It is not meant to be punitive. It is to remind you about how do you get that next box? How do you build your career with me?
Yeah, it's all part of that whole, like, offering people a career, not a job, isn't it? Like they've got to step it up and understand these things. And people will be watching this and listening to this at the moment, and they're probably thinking, yeah, that's great, but like, if I wouldn't have that conversation with my current team, they'd all let's jump ship and go work for someone else, right?
No, it's been a fear forever. And I'm talking about going back to manuals and staffing and things of that nature when I was getting paid a lot of money to go to a lot of these shops. It's really more about the owner's own fear. Now, again, whatever you present, like good marketing, has to be not what you want, what's in it for them. So I explained that all of what we do, and whether it's manuals or training or the staffing program, always has to be in this order. It has to be good for the customer, so that it's good for the company, so that it can be good for you, the staff, for the long run. And then it will be good for me. That's the order. And when you explain it that way, it's less what I want as an owner, because I don't care if I'm them. And not if you can get out of your own chair and go sit in their chair, you would be the same way. So they don't quit, but they also they loved it at my company. And again, they didn't have to because they were a union shop. And basically they could just said no. But what I said to them way back when was we were butting heads, us in the union. And I just went to the union and said, look, the way I look at it is we're getting ready to go over a cliff. And I'm okay with that if you're okay with it, or we can figure out a way that we can work together better and we both get what we want. And to their credit, they said yes.
Wow.
And we changed this about how long you were here, no longer counted. It is how you demonstrated. And they loved the idea that they were in training, and they loved that they could move up, and they loved that they could have a career, because they recognized by the time you get to be 40 something as a tech, your knees bother you, your hearing, your eyesight, there's just a bunch of things that happen to you. And so if they can earn to become a field supervisor, which doesn't mean they ride around all day, it's a bad name, but basically is they help run their team. And the way I describe it is, done right, is a field supervisor is the first line of support for their team. So they get the benefit of having their own company, but with your systems. So they don't have all the headaches, because as a tech, a good tech who had an entrepreneurial seizure to go buy a white truck and figured they could sell it for a couple of dollars cheaper and all the money would follow, you have found out that's not true. You didn't think about the costs of insurance and trucks and licensing and advertising, marketing. And, I could just go on with all what it takes to be in business and be successful at it. I said the 7 things, but there's a lot of stuff in here. It's difficult to run a business. So they loved that. They became the service manager. They became the install manager. They became the top salespeople. They even became the sales manager. There's a lot of position as you go and grow. They could go off and run one of our spokes. And it's great to export a field supervisor out to a spoke, because they can replicate, if you have documented systems for all of what I'm spouting out here, you can begin to operate in different places. Having been in Sydney all of once, I can tell you have a lot of traffic, just like a place called New York, where I operated.
Yeah.
And so I could be an hour away or a day away in the same location. And so when you have hubs and spokes, it's great. But if you're thinking when you stop listening to this is, I'm going to do what Al says. I'm going to have, instead of this, I'm going to have a hub and I'm going to have a bunch of spokes, and you don't have any documented regulated systems for everything I'm talking about, that shop is rogue.
Yeah.
They will never operate. Yeah. Very funny. I was doing with a podcaster who was in the cleaning business, and I'm telling him about most people couldn't replicate their business a mile away. And he starts laughing when I say that. And I go, what's so funny? He goes, Al, we outgrew our business at where we were in our company. So we bought the building next door, and it was like we were on 2 sides of the earth. That's how much.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, it just ties back to that whole thing. Like you'll never scale. You'll always do the things in your business that you should not have to be doing if you don't process them out. And like, I sit here and I say this to you, and I just can think of a million things like that I need to still process out in my business. And like, we have a staff of, almost 20 now. And like, I'm still stuck. Like this isn't, I don't think it's ever going to end.
It's never going to end. But part of it is, Matt, you're attaching to people, thinking that if I had more people, and what my case and many of the big companies that I worked with that were out of control, they did the same thing I did. There's an oncoming bus, and I just kept throwing people at it, hoping to slow the bus down. The way you slow that bus or even stop it is to build systems that you can platform up. And that's, like you said, you already have an org chart. It just needs to be tweaked. What's going on in the boxes just needs to be tweaked. It isn't like you're starting at zero, but you have to do this work. One thing I would advocate to you and those who are listening, and it's part of the, the manuals in the program, but it's a thing called the time tracking sheet, which I had to do myself years ago. And it really was breaking down the day in hours. And I would have to write, not every little detail, but what was I doing? Why was I doing it? And here was the last best column is, should I have been the one doing it? And when I wrote those out, and you can type it if you like, but I wrote it out, and very fast, I realized I was just doing stuff either because I was good at it, or I just felt it was easier for me to do it than burden my staff. Because my staff had trained me We're too busy. We're too busy. We're too busy. Busy with what? That's why even when they tell me they're too busy, and my clients have done this for years, is, what, I hear you, Matt, you're busy. Do me a favor, just fill out this time tracking sheet for a week. 80% of the time, those people never come back to show the sheet because they realize it's a self-correcting exercise on what they were doing, either doing too much, too extreme, or working on the wrong thing.
Funnily enough, we've had twice in the last week, I've had the opposite, where people have said, and they said to our ops manager, I just don't have anything to do. So we've implemented time tracking recently, which is something I never ever wanted to do. I've never wanted to do this, but like we could see productivity holes and people taking advantage of remote working and that kind of thing. And so my ops managers basically said, no, we're doing this. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we've done it. And of course, shit hits the fan, as you can imagine. But anyway, like we've had the opposite and people saying, well, I just don't have anything to do. And like, I nearly fell off my chair. I'm like, what? Like, especially one of these positions, I'm like there's literally more to do in this position than any other job in the whole business. And it's going to require team and staff eventually. And they're going, and I'm thinking, how the heck did it possibly, like, how did this not get communicated? Like this role, again, obviously my fault for not driving it home enough. And I know, like, I absolutely did drive home the importance of it in the beginning, but I clearly haven't
That's like saying you're going to coach my kids once.
Yeah.
You're not going to do that. And they're not calling them kids. We're all kids. But ultimately it's this is in the, the weekly meetings where we're talking about what's going on and what isn't happening and basing on, 4 KPIs, known performance indicators that are objective about what is and isn't. If you're overly productive and quick, great. And if you take a little longer and we're not paying you an hourly salary, so be it. But ultimately, I'm going to judge you on the 4 KPIs every week. I'm going to check your homework every week. And when I say I mean, who they're reporting to, that's part of their job, is to get them better trained so that they are efficient, they can do more, and then we can maximize, our time.
Yeah.
Time is really the big thing we have to balance. And
I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years. And, my coach has been trying to tell me to do this, and I've struggled with it. Like he said, everyone should be responsible for a number, which essentially is saying, what's their KPI, right? Like making them show up to the weekly meeting and say, here's my number, I'm on track or I'm not on track or whatever that is. And like, I think in truth, I think like I look at it now and I think until I can get that completely dialed in, there's always going to be that, productivity gap where people are like, well,
it is, the way that it was explained to me years ago is, I'm expecting you to jump, but I'm not telling you when. I'm expecting you to jump, but I'm not telling you how high. And yet I'm still judging you, right? That's what you're doing here when you don't define it. For all of you listening out there, again, this is not a conversation between me and Matt. You could easily apply it to your accounts payable person, accounts receivable person, your CSRs, your dispatchers, your techs. Everyone at your company needs to have a couple of objective measurements. Sometimes it's not money. It's, can you get the invoices in? Can you get the bills paid? Can the taxes be paid on time if they're an AP person? Or in the case of a tech, how many, billable hours? What's their efficiency? What is their average ticket? What are they doing every week? Break it down into chewable sizes. Not what I like to compare it to is, I don't need to know every screw that's on the shelf. I need to know how many boxes of screws I have. So this craziness, because computerization and technology today will allow you to put up 15 screens of information. If you need 15 screens of information to run your company, you got a problem.
Oh yeah.
Or you're just going way too deep. Yeah. Way too deep. I do agree with 2 big screens. There's a lot of proactivity for doing that, but it always comes back to really managing the most important things that they have the ability to put their fingerprints on and affect how things turn. And if they, we all want to know the famous WIFM, what's in it for me? Mm-hmm. So what do I get if I do? Mm-hmm. What happens to me if I don't? Mm-hmm. We all want to know that.
Mate, this has been great. I suppose we could probably talk all day like we normally do in relation to any of these things, but I suppose respectful of your time and everyone else's
They don't want to keep listening to us.
Everyone's throbbing eardrums. We probably should get close to wrapping this up. But I do, before we go, I know you've got this amazing program. It is online. There's been a bunch of listeners and viewers that have gone over and checked that out. And I want to encourage you guys, if you are looking to implement process into your business, you will not find a better program than Al's 7-Power Contractor program. We have our own special page where you get a discount if you want to go through the program. You have no excuse not to go and check it out. Al, do you have the link for that? Is it /?
It's 7-Power Contractor /S3 TSS. That's the staffing program.
Got it.
The one that Matt also has is 7powercontractor.com /TSS, which is the operating manuals and the org charts and all of that as well, of which have a great electrician who's just killing it in Sydney.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking, does this fit me here in Australia? Heck yeah, it does.
I'm going to get those links for you guys, and they're going to be in the show notes. Use them because you save a bucket of cash on them. And I can tell you right now, that's the best investment. Like, if there's been one significant change in my business throughout its evolution, it's the implementation of process. And I can promise you guys, it's not vertical specific, but if you want to grow the business and you want to do it in a way that is scalable and I suppose more importantly, consistent according to the way that you want your business to run, there's no other way to do it. There is literally no other way to do it. So head across there and get access to this program. It will save you decades.
No question about it. We mastered it. We made every mistake so you don't have to. But every truck you put on the road here in America, that's minimum 300,000. I don't know what it relates to you guys back there, but whatever it is that your trucks are doing, if they're any good, just imagine that you could put 3 trucks, 5 trucks, 10 trucks. We have companies here in America that I work with. They're putting out 40 techs at a time, 40.
Jeez.
Now that's a monster company. I have another company that we belong to, and you know, Alan, there's 20 trucks they put out in the same program that you're looking at.
Wow.
And even if you just put out 2 or 3, you will pay this off 10 times, whatever that is.
Oh, at least. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Anyway, Al, thank you so much once again.
Thanks as always, Matt.
It's always great having you on the show. Wealth of knowledge. And I'm sure all the listeners out there are going to absolutely love this episode. So guys, I'm going to put all the links to that in the show notes. It's up to you to go and check it out, although we will email that to you as well. If you're part of our mailing list, we'll make it real easy for you, but you have to click the button. All right.
Do it right now.
Do it while you're driving.
Remember, Matt, if they go to my website and chat me and say they want to, reach out to me, we'll set up a Zoom meeting. I'll be happy to do that. There's no obligations. It's not a sales call. Mm-hmm. I just want contractors around the world to have a much better life. There's a reason my tagline has been less stress, more success. I suffered the other side of that.
All right. It's been great. Well, thank you very much, Al. For you listeners and viewers out there, you've got the information. Now go and implement. And I look forward to hearing about some of these successes. Thank you very much, Al. And that's a wrap. Folks, if you enjoyed this podcast, I'm pretty sure you're going to love some of these other podcasts that I recorded with Al Levy, the 7-Power Contractor, in relation to staff and recruitment. In episodes 137, 138, and 139, we recorded a series which was titled The Ultimate Blueprint to Finding, Training, and Retaining A-Level Staff. And in episode 58, we recorded an entire podcast on staffing power, which is one of Al's signature programs. Go and check them out. The links are in this post. Go and check those out. They're available on all podcasting platforms. If you're watching this, the links are in the post. And if you're not sure where to get them, head across to thesiteshed.com and find the show notes for this episode. Everything will be in there.